So Dr. Eggman.
いかにもわしこそこの世に並ぶもののない天才科学者ドクター・エッグマン様じゃ。
Dr. Eggman is a very well-known character in the Sonic franchise. Yes, I'm doing the same intro again, fuck you. So, going into Dr. Eggman as a character, how do you describe this man besides he's an evil genius whose actual name is Dr. Robotnik and he makes robots? Well, there's not as much I can go into as with Sonic, but there is a couple things there I can talk about with Eggman as a character. Again, this will be a full-on character analysis of Dr. Eggman. We will be talking about what is it about Eggman, what is he in Japanese, and how he is represented, and how it is very much misplaced in other media. But again, I want to maybe not go fully in depth like I did with Sonic because there's not a lot there with Eggman as much as I can do with Sonic. I will try my best to say as much in detail as I can. So, before we start, I have to start off with the obvious thing. The English Eggman is alright or whatever. It's very weird, and the Japanese Eggman is the better version, and I will always recommend that to you more than anything, and that's what I'm talking about today, because I don't like the American version of Sonic in general. Now, let's go into Eggman's story, or at least origin. So, unlike Sonic, who was born on Christmas Island, Dr. Eggman has nowhere specifically he is known to be born. He is just born on Earth with humans, which Sonic has. All we know is that he has a cousin, a grandfather, and parents, and an uncle, due to Maria being his cousin. Also means Gerald had 2 kids. That is what we know about Eggman's past. As far as we know from SA2, Eggman has some kind of admiration from his grandfather, which was a scientist, so he became a scientist in the future, which I think makes sense. And we'll talk about that a little later with this character and with how people perceive SA2. Besides that, Eggman grew up, did whatever he did, and he became Dr. Eggman as we know today. This is a little bit different from the English side, which is more of just Dr. Robotnik. He was made in a lab from a rotten egg with Sonic and yada yada yada, but none of that exists. Eggman and Sonic's first time meeting was before Sonic won, but he was already kind of evil then. There is no Sonic and Eggman being best pals or anything. They were already rivals from the first time they met, and it makes sense because of what Eggman does. Now, hold on to your pants because I'm about to go into a little bit of a tangent here because there is something that I really don't like about what they've added to Eggman because of American influence. Now, we all know that his name is Dr. Eggman, but his name is also Dr. Robotnik, and I think that makes no sense. To be honest, in continuity nowadays, they don't really mention it at all. Besides Frontiers, they never really mention again that his name is Dr. Robotnik besides SA2. But I still find it dumb that they made that a detail. I find it weird because it doesn't make sense for Sonic to just give Eggman that name unless he didn't tell him his name. So Sonic gave him the name like he does. Sonic gives out names, not nicknames. Fucking Dream Team. Saying he gave him that nickname is kind of a weird thing for Sonic to do in my opinion, but of course it's down to whoever thinks it's good. Him being named Dr. Ivor Robotnik, well, I'm going to explain why. So, going by Japanese standards, in Japan, when you use Dr. whatever, we assume in America they use the last name. But in Japan, technically you use the first name. So, it clearly retcons what the Japanese is doing because, first of all, his name is Dr. Eggman, which means his first name is Eggman, and he names everything after egg, so it makes sense that his name is actually Eggman, because it would make no sense for him to call everything after an egg when he's literally supposed to be Robotnik, especially when he doesn't like the nickname. And again, he's not even called Eggman in most early English manuals, so it doesn't make sense. Again, his name is supposed to be Dr. Eggman, first name being Eggman. Robotnik is his last name. So you could say, and we're going by the American idea of it, so he calls himself Dr. Robotnik because that's his last name. But that doesn't make sense because his grandfather, Professor Gerald, is what they call him. They don't call him Professor Robotnik because again, that will make them both have the last name Robotnik and will make them both have the same doctor initial. Dr. Robotnik and Dr. Robotnik. It doesn't make sense. They call him Professor Gerald because they're going with the Japanese idea of the naming schemes. Professor Gerald is what they call him throughout the entire series. They never call him Gerald Robotnik besides SA2. Later on, they just call him Professor Gerald because that is his first name. That is not his last name. So again, it makes no sense for his last name to be Robotnik. Again, you would call him Dr. Robotnik and not Dr. Gerald, so we're not going by the American idea. So, technically, it makes no sense for him to be Dr. Ivor Robotnik because that's not his name. Even if you change it to Eggman Robotnik, it still doesn't make sense because, like, it's dumb. His name was Dr. Eggman. He was never really given a last name. And if you need more proof that this is how Japanese works, then look nowhere further than Dragon Ball. Look at Bulma and her father. Everyone assumes Bulma's name is Bulma Briefs, which is not true because, again, in Japanese, first name is where they put it. So his name is Dr. Briefs, which means his first name is Briefs. Most of the characters in Dragon Ball don't have last names besides Goku. Goku is the rarest person in the world to have a last name, and it is shown in this manga panel right here with Videl and Gohan. She says it's abnormal to have a last name in Dragon Ball. So it makes sense that his first name is Briefs because they go by first names with doctors. So it makes sense for Eggman's name to be Eggman and not Robotnik. In anything, it's a dumb retcon that makes no fucking sense, and I hope it dies. And what Eggman does is destroy the environment. With Eggman and Sonic, they are two parallels. Sonic is supposed to be the embodiment of the world and the environment and everything, while Eggman on the opposite side is supposed to represent the destruction of the world and the embodiment with machines and getting rid of nature, while Sonic is the one who supports nature. And that is what makes them opposites, and there's a lot more that makes them opposites which I find interesting, but we'll get to those later. With that, we already know what Eggman is. Eggman is the opposite to Sonic, who is the bad guy of the whole series. We basically know who Eggman is. So, how do we really go about talking about Eggman? Well, we can start with the simple stuff, like for instance, Eggman's childlike nature. Eggman's childlike nature is a very prominent thing in his character, if you really think about it. With Eggman, if you see him in any game, every time he goes off, he's always red in anger or he's always having a little fit. If you look at any media with Eggman, whenever he loses, he has a childlike fit. He is described as being childlike, so it makes sense for him to be childlike when he is losing. And so that comes with a lot of baggage if you actually think about it. When we go into Eggman in like the earlier classic games, he is seen as a more naive kind of bad guy. He doesn't think he's doing bad, but overall, he doesn't know what destruction he's making towards the world. And that's what I think makes Eggman interesting, at least in the beginning. He isn't thinking of himself as a bad guy because he thinks he's just making his ideal world and what he wants with his childlike nature, but also he thinks he's bettering the world better than what nature does in theory. Eggman thinks what he does will better the world in a way, unlike what Sonic understands is the world can be better with technology, but at the same time, it still needs nature there to keep it alive, which Eggman does not understand, and which I think is an interesting idea when we're talking about Eggman and Sonic as a parallel, because Sonic loves the world as it is, but Eggman wants to make the world in his image, and I think that's very interesting. Going on with Eggman, Eggman is a man, unlike Sonic, who is known to plan out things, but like Sonic, he is also known to not be able to think things all the way through. As seen in Sonic Unleashed with Dark Gaia and everything, he did not know that Dark Gaia would betray him. Also, he did not have a backup plan for it.
なんと根性のない、いくらいきなり叩き起こされたからといって砕け散るとは。ぶっちゃけエッグマン様が無茶したせいです。なんだと？まったくどいつもこいつも。ピックル教授はガイア文書ともども逃げ出すし、星のパーツも戻されてしまうし。ダメだ。それはエッグマン様がソニックと一緒にカオスエメラルドを捨ててしまったせいなんですがね。ぶっちゃけエッグマン様ご自身の誤解です。やかましい。あれはわざとじゃ。わざと。計画があっけなく達成できてしまったら面白くないだろうが。
And also, there's a lot of times in Unleashed where Eggman launched off Sonic, where basically that was his first failure because he should have not knocked out Sonic with the Chaos Emeralds, but he did that, and guess what? He failed. But Eggman, of course, will not take that on the head and actually accept it because Eggman has the ego. Plus, he is also a narcissist. And you may be thinking, what is a narcissist? A narcissist is defined as personality qualities include thinking very highly of oneself, needing admiration, believing others are inferior, and lacking empathy for others. Now, Let's go into that because that's a very important part of Eggman. It first says that Eggman thinks very highly of himself, which is true. If you look at most games, Eggman is calling him the greatest scientist ever, or the greatest man to ever live, or something along those lines. Eggman has always seen himself as a genius, as a super genius who can never be beaten. And if someone beats him, it's a fluke or it's bullcrap, and I'll baby about it later. That's why I will always vouch for Sonic being confident and not cocky, because Eggman is the type of person to not admit when he is wrong or when he has failed. Later on, he kind of does, but at the same time, he still holds that grudge. But Eggman, he's cocky and believes in himself so much that he will not accept the fate that he is given, which I think makes him a great villain to drive him to go forward every time. The reason why I call Sonic specifically confident and not cocky is because it makes more sense for Sonic as a character, and compared to Eggman, who is genuinely cocky. Again, let's go into that. With Sonic, the definition of confident is feeling or showing confidence in oneself, self-assured. That is what Sonic is. Sonic is literally confident in himself, and he is self-assured when he can do something, but he can also admit when he overdoes it. What makes the difference between confidence and cocky is that when you're confident, you can admit when you're wrong, and you can admit when you're maybe too weak to handle the situation. Sonic does this, even if he has to test it out, because Sonic is a person who does not think things all the way through, so of course he has to admit it after the fact. It makes sense for his character. But when we're talking about Eggman, Eggman is cocky, and the definition of cocky is conceited or arrogant, especially in a bold or impudent way. Eggman literally embodies that. He is literally conceited. He puts his face on everything. He literally calls himself the greatest genius scientist of all time who will defeat that hedgehog. That's literally Eggman. And he's super fucking arrogant. I don't get how this is impossible to understand. Sonic is not that way, and Eggman does it in a very bold way. Sonic is confident in a very bold way, but he's not cocky. A lot of people use ideas of like, Sonic doesn't think things through. That's just something he does. It doesn't mean he's not confident. And again, Sonic will admit when he doesn't fully take things into account. Sonic just does what feels right, but he will admit later on when he does something wrong. And of course, Sonic is not arrogant. He will say he's cool, or he'll tell someone about his speed, but most of the time when he talks about his speed, he is telling it in a way of comfort. Most times that Sonic talks about his speed, it is only in the time of comfort. If anyone says anything opposite to this, it makes no sense, because Sonic as a character is shown to admit when he's wrong and to show confidence in himself and knows he can do it. But what about when Sonic gets angry and stuff like that? It's not because he's arrogant, it's because someone is playing unfair. If you actually notice, when people play unfair, Sonic gets angry. When people don't play unfair, Sonic has no problem with it. Again, if you want a good example, look at Team Sonic Racing. The whole time, no one does anything unfair, he's having fun. But when he's with Jet, he's angry as hell. Unlike Eggman, who is angry either way. If he gets his ass whooped fair and square, he is still going to get mad. And I hate this idea that Sonic has to be cocky to be cool, because you're so fucking stupid that you can't see that a confident person can be cool too. Look at fucking Yusuke. He is literally the perfect guy to look at. He's a very confident guy and has a lot of cool like street brawling stuff, but he's confident, not cocky. And look at Goku, the main fucking shonen protagonist of the entire anime series. This dude is confident as hell. He has on multiple occasions admitted when he is wrong. I think people take Sonic's influence so hard that they forget that Sonic is a character who is clearly rooted in his point of being confident, because it opposites Eggman, who is fully cocky. It doesn't make sense for them both to be cocky, because at the end of the day, none of them will admit they were wrong. In his song, he literally states, well, I don't know, but I can't be wrong. But he is also the one to say, place all your bets on the one you think is right, because Sonic is the character to let you find your own way. And if I find out I'm wrong later on, it's obvious that that's it. I was wrong. And again, he has shown to do this multiple times. Look at Sonic and the Black Knight, where Merlin and everything. But I digress. We're going back to Eggman. Now, with him being all about stopping Sonic and everything, it makes sense. He's so full of himself that he really can't see himself actually changing or anything. And I think this makes so much sense for his character. He's very much a narcissist in a strong way that really can't be changed, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, the next part about Eggman and his narcissism is needing admiration, believing others are inferior, and lacking empathy of others. Now, this is very important because Eggman kinda does need admiration. Eggman wants to rule the world. That's basically the biggest point of admiration. And I think that is very important for a character who is a narcissist and who is very much egotistical compared to Sonic. And with him believing others are inferior, of course, he does that all the time. He thinks himself as the greatest scientist of all time. He will always put down someone. Eggman is a character who never states a lot of people by name besides Sonic, Shadow, and maybe Knuckles. Besides those, he never states anyone else by their name because Eggman really doesn't care. He really only cares about himself and believing he is superior to others. Eggman is very much a very egotistical guy. And now, to the biggest point I ever have to make. Let's talk about Sonic Frontiers a little bit. In Sonic Frontiers, there's this character named Sage. She has a whole arc, yada yada yada. And in the end, Eggman is somehow thinking of her as a daughter, which is, in my opinion, completely stupid. Because, let's not forget, Eggman is a narcissist. He only cares for himself, no one else. And there is nowhere else in the series where Eggman somehow softens up and becomes this softer person. You could say IDW, but I'd slap you in the face. But there is no point anywhere in the series where it says that Eggman specifically has any kind of relationship with anyone else. Eggman only uses people for his own personal gain, which is a part of being a narcissist. You use others for your personal gain and you don't really have any connection with them. And also a part of being a narcissist is the fact that you can never ever really admit it. So for Eggman to admit that he is falling soft for someone or he's having a daughter or whatever and he loves his baby girl and he wants to take care of her, oh, it's his baby girl, blah, blah, blah. No, that's not Eggman. Eggman does not care for anyone but himself. Even if you take SA2 into example, it doesn't make sense that he cares for anyone else. The only reason why he saves the world is because he wants to take it over. It's obvious. It makes the most sense because he's evil. He's evil, but he has morals. It's even shown in Sonic X, in the Meta X saga, where Eggman is like, yeah, I don't want to destroy the world because I want to take it over. Why would I let him do that? There is actually something you could do if Forces wasn't a shitty script and wasn't forced all over the place. You could actually see that Eggman, in some subtle way, in Japanese, is better written in that idea because he's a narcissist. He can't fully admit when he's wrong and stuff like that. He could maybe grow and maybe get a little bit better and try something, which he does in the Japanese version, where he asks Sage at the end to go get something to eat, which is a very subtle thing. It's also very much a Japanese term, which is used to kind of show a subtle connection. Unlike in English, where he's just, that's my baby girl, that's my daughter, yada yada yada. It doesn't make sense. Now, just so I'm not making you guys feel like, oh, Eggman can't be redeemed, yada yada yada. No, Eggman's a narcissist, but narcissists can be redeemed. There is a way to do it, but naturally how they did it in Sonic Frontiers is the worst way to do it. The idea with a narcissist is that they have to want to change, and also sometimes they have to hit rock bottom to really get to that. They'd have to lose everything they've ever had to actually change. So if you really want Eggman to change, it's possible. You just have to make him go very, very down bad till he can't do anything and he is in a depressed state and maybe change that. Frontiers not do this because Ian Flynn can't write the characters right. If you want two good examples, let's look at the Lego Batman movie. The whole movie, Batman is very conceited, very narcissistic, but still a good guy, but is very narcissistic. Even in the end, when you see the little cube talking to him, she says that you're not a bad guy, but you're not really a good guy. Again, because of Batman's narcissism, he really pushed everyone away. His new family, his old family, and the people around him. In the end, he learns after losing literally everything that he needs to take consideration for others, needs to actually be more open to doing stuff for others and actually let people in, which is what he learns at the end. And for another example, Cusco from The Emperor's New Groove. He's the biggest narcissist ever, and he learns kindness through Pacha throughout the whole movie, even though he lies to him, cheats, and even disregards everything and projects on him, which Eggman does a lot because he thinks you're so cocky or whatever. He always gets mad when someone else kind of puts him down a size, which makes sense for his character, and which is why I think the narcissism makes the most sense for Eggman as a character, and I think should be there and pinpointed. which if you want a video for both of these, I suggest Cinema Therapy's Lego Batman video and their Emperor's New Groove video, which is where I got this from. And I thought it was very interesting to put for an Eggman video. Now, going on to the next point of Eggman, which is basically his murderous intent. His murderous intent is very important because there's a story and marketing reason why he doesn't actually kill. Eggman is a killer. Let's not get that wrong. He is a killer and has, on multiple occasions, kind of stated to want to kill people. Again, this is definitely a factor in his character, but there is a genuine, obvious reason why Eggman can't kill. It's literally because of the fact that this is a kid's show, or this is a kid's game, whatever you want to call it. That's basically it. Eggman can't kill anyone, at least on screen, because of the genuine fact that it's a kid's series. He can't do much. He can't go around killing everyone because kids are playing this game, and he can't murder like that because kids play this game. This is the only reason, and if anyone has any debate of if Eggman is a killer, it makes no sense because he threatens everyone every time he can. Again, Eggman is a killer, but he is not allowed to kill because of the genuine fact that this is a kid's show. It's very obvious that Eggman wants to kill people, and he could, but he just can't. Now, if you want to go on the opposite side and talk about Sonic X, where he doesn't kill, we'll talk about that in a minute when we switch gears to another character, or another characterization. And the fact is, we know that Eggman is a person who would kill because Eggman has always been described as a spiteful person, which makes sense because he wants to hurt them or kill them, so it makes sense. Now, this is the obvious thing about Eggman. Since this is his video, I do want to talk about it a little bit. Eggman kind of being a genius. I want to talk about that a little bit because we know he's a genius. It's just obvious, you know, right? It's the basic thing of Eggman. He's a genius with the IQ 300. And I think it's very interesting because when we compare Eggman and Sonic, it makes so many interesting things make more sense. Because with Eggman, he's a genius. So, of course, he's going to have a very cocky presence with him. And I think that shows how he really is as a genius because we know there are good geniuses out there, but we also know there are plenty of geniuses who are just very egotistical and stuff like that, which I think makes a good parallel for Eggman and Sonic because Eggman and Sonic are two different sides of being smart. While Eggman is the school genius or the scientist genius, Sonic is the opposite by being street smart. Sonic is able to adapt and accept the world as it is, and it very much goes into Sonic's confidence and also his kindness and openness to doing whatever. Eggman is all about the science or his genius behind it, and sometimes his own selfish reasons. But again, it's kind of like Eggman uses the world to his advantage, and because he's a genius and because he has that ego or cockiness, he kind of thinks of the whole world as a scientific playground to use on a lot of people and to use as kind of a manipulative thing because he thinks he's the smartest out of them all, aka Knuckles, because he's been tricked how many times now? Now, I know I was probably ranting on and on and on and on about Eggman and how horrible IDW is, but you know what? I'll give IDW some credit. They get some things right about the character. Not everything. It's fucking bad, but not everything they get wrong. So today, we're going to talk about something they got right with Eggman, or at least I find interesting. At least by Ian Flynn, not by IDW in general. But what I find interesting in Sonic Frontiers is actually that Eggman kinda has a little bit of a problem with Maria, which I think is interesting because it explores why Eggman has this narcissistic or this egotistical kind of idea with himself. Because with narcissism, it comes from how you were raised or just your experiences. And so it makes sense that with this whole idea, Eggman became this way maybe because of how everyone admired Maria more than they admired him when he was the smartest kid on the block and he was trying to do things. I don't know. I just find it interesting because maybe that could be why Eggman has a motive. Now, let's go back to touching on a subject I talked about a little bit earlier, which is a little bit of Eggman's manipulative side. As we've seen with him and Knuckles on multiple occasions, Eggman is a character who can manipulate people. He can make people think, oh, he's turning into a good guy. To some people. Of course, everyone won't believe him, especially Sonic and friends, because they've been around him. Maybe Knuckles a little naive and he sees the good in everyone, but most of the time, Eggman sometimes can manipulate them and is smart enough to use his fake manipulation on Sonic. For instance, look at Sonic Unleashed. As you see in this opening scene, Sonic has finally gotten Eggman, but Eggman plays the baby here and is like, Sonic, I'm so sorry. I won't do it again, promise I'll change a new leaf. He says, that's unusually honest for you, Dr. Eggman. well, how about we stop playing these silly games and... Now, this point right here is something very important I want to talk about with Dr. Eggman, because I kind of hate what Shiro Maekawa does with this, and it kind of goes into IDW too. Now let me get into it. Let's think about it. Eggman is a man all about the loving of machines. So, this is the type of guy who does not really do anything very physical. Eggman is a man who does everything with robots or anything else he can get his hands on. Again, Eggman is not a man who uses weapons. Now, I know most people are going to say, but what about SA2? And in SA2, he uses a gun on Amy. It's like, well, yeah, but that was just to fucking make Eggman look cool. Again, I am personally a person who does not give a fuck about cool factor. I would rather them be cool by being themselves. It's also fucking dumb because he has fucking guns on his fucking machine. Why does he need to hold Amy at gunpoint? Oh, because it's cool. That's it. There's really no other reason for it. This goes into a bigger problem which we see later with IDW, at least for me, because in IDW, they're so deep on making Eggman this big menacing villain that he fucking slams everyone, when most of the time if he did that, he would fucking get his ass whooped. We know damn well Eggman is not the type of person to get the fuck out of his vehicle and do something very aggressive. It makes no fucking sense. But at the same time, so when people are like, oh my gosh, it's so cool, look at the silhouette and look at him slam them to the ground, it's so badass, it's so cool for Eggman to do. And it's like, no, this is like fucking boring. This is like boring to me because like, oh, it's so cool that Eggman's doing this. And it's like, I don't care. To be honest, I would rather have Eggman show off his power with his mechs like he's supposed to be. Sonic is clearly the more athletic / more physical character, while Eggman is clearly the character who uses other tools and items to do his thing. So it makes no sense for me to see Eggman grabbing people just because it looks fucking cool. Now, let's talk about Eggman and Sonic's dynamic. This is a very obvious thing to go over because they are the main hero and villain of the story. Eggman and Sonic's dynamic is very simple. Sonic chases Eggman because Eggman does bad things, but Sonic, for the most part, is having fun with Eggman. But there's always that slight idea in Classic Sonic where he is genuinely annoyed with what Eggman's doing, because Eggman, for the most part, is very annoying, messing with his planet, messing with his friends, and that gets on Sonic's nerves, which makes him go after Eggman, because he's messing up what he loves. So that's one thing. And then, of course, we have Eggman on the opposite side who genuinely hates Sonic and wants to see him dead. But in the classics, if you actually read his character description or manuals, it shows that Eggman wants to take over the world and control the Chaos Emeralds, but he maybe wants to control Sonic. I'm not sure if this is fully the right idea because you can interpret it in both ways. He could either be wanting to destroy Sonic or it could be wanting to control Sonic. But I find it interesting that he may want to control Sonic because it could mean that Eggman wants to use Sonic because Sonic is a power source of the Chaos Emeralds. So it makes sense that he would want to control Sonic. So I find that interesting in a lot of ways. And I think that could be a thing. But at the same time, we find out in later manuals that while Eggman does show hate for Sonic, he kind of does like having him around. He does kind of wait for him to come around because he knows he's going to come around and do something. That's why a lot of times he says, I knew he wasn't dead. I knew you were coming, because Eggman knows that Sonic is probably going to come at some point, and he kind of has an enjoyment of it, and it kind of comes with their playful banter because Sonic and Eggman have very well known playful banter, especially in most games, especially if you look at Unleashed in this scene right here.
Yo, Eggman! この間はハイなスカイダイビングを味わわせてくれてありがとうよ。
やはり生きておったか、しぶといハリネズミめが。
あれ、なんか。
少しばかり遅かったようだな、ソニック。ドクター・エッグマン、わしの素晴らしい技術によりダークガイアはすでに完全体になっている。そしてこいつはそのエネルギーを利用して作り上げたウルトラハイパープロトタイプ第1号じゃ。行くぞー。
Eggman kind of has a respect for Sonic. Building off of that respect for Sonic, Eggman kind of does have some respect for Shadow. I'm not going to go into it fully here because we have a Shadow video to talk about that. Now, moving on, we obviously know that Eggman is a genius scientist, but we also know he's kind of an archaeologist too. He is kind of in that same area, I'd say, not just making robots, but also kind of looking for ancient artifacts, as we know from every game in the series where he summons a god or summons some giant big monster to come take care of everything. We know that Eggman is kind of an archaeologist, and I find that as a nice detail because it shows that Eggman is a scientist more than just inventing things. He also explores things and gets things that he needs, which has been known since the classics, but I just wanted to mention it because it's a part of his character. Now, let's talk about Eggman's human traits. Well, the one we already know about is his childlike nature, which makes him very understandable as kind of a human, as you could say. Eggman is supposed to embody those people who destroy the environment and everything. Also, those people, if you think about it, are actually human. And as you see in earlier Sonic Jam manuals and stuff like that, it says that Eggman is a little oblivious to what he's doing. He thinks what he's doing is good and means no ill will, but actually he's doing the worst fucking thing ever. Later on in the series, you can say that, oh, he started seeing himself as the villain, like he's okay with it, which is fine to think. But in the beginning, he was kind of like, I'm bringing no ill will. Like I said before, he kind of thinks of the world as making it better by using technology and not using the environment. He thinks he's better than the environment, which is where his narcissism comes in and his big belief in making giant robots, which is interesting because if you think about it, Gerald, who was the man who was trying to embetter the world and try to make the world a better place by doing the right thing, Eggman kind of took that the opposite way and did something bad because he didn't know. He doesn't probably have a role model tell him that that's wrong because Gerald is dead, and Gerald, well, we know what happens. He becomes a fucking sociopath, but Gerald is not around to really shake Eggman out of it. So Eggman is kind of grown from what he has as a kid. He's admired his grandfather for so long, but surprisingly he died before he could really be around him because he never finished his research with Maria. It was all about Maria. It was never about him. So it makes sense for Eggman to do this. And it even shows at the end of SA2 where he's talking to Tails, where they do a horrible job of translating what Tails was saying and made it sound so fucking bad. But in here he says this.
幼いわしにとってじいさんはまさにヒーローじゃった。子供心にいつかはじいさんのような科学者になることを夢見たもんじゃ。じゃが、じいさんは本気でわしらを滅ぼしたかったんじゃろうか。
Which I find interesting because weren't you trying to kill the world? Yes, but at the same time, this is during more of that classic era before Eggman really started accepting himself as a villain. So you see here that, oh, Eggman really thinks he's giving no ill will here, and he's like really trying to like embetter the world. Why is my grandfather doing this? Did he really want to destroy the world? The man I admired wants to destroy the world, so he was the bad guy. But of course, Eggman being a narcissist doesn't care and does his own thing.
わからないけど、でも僕たちはちゃんとやり遂げたよ。
そうじゃな。だが今度はわし一人の力でやり遂げてみせるわ。世界征服をな。
まだ懲りてないの？
当たり前だ。今度の時は容赦しないんだい。
こっちこそ。
But again, like Tails says at the end, we did it. I don't see the scene how Ian Flynn sees it, I assume, because of how he tries to bring so much humanity to Eggman. He tries to make Eggman so attached and so connected and feel so human to a degree which is uncomfortable, like with Sage and everything. Like again, Eggman, he doesn't give a shit. He just had that psychological question in his head because his grandfather was seen as this great man. He wasn't seen as this person who was a killer. As far as he's known growing up, he was a great man. For him to see this different side of him just shocked him more than anything because it made him who he was, but at the same time, of course, he didn't do everything the same. So this scene doesn't make him human more than anything. It just makes him kind of reflect on where he's at and how he got here and what his grandfather really meant, because it kind of goes into the idea of perceiving your ancestors and stuff like that. And it could be an interesting thing to go through in a Sonic story not written by Ian Flynn. As we did with Sonic, with the classic Sonic and Mayakawa Sonic, we're going to do the same for Eggman. But this one is a little more specific. Well, for the most part, it's the same as a classic Sonic and Mayakawa Sonic. Sonic has two different characterizations, but they're fairly similar and don't change dramatically. Eggman has that same thing. What we're comparing here is classic Eggman to Sonic X Eggman, or X Eggman if you will. Eggman is basically the same Eggman. The only thing that's different is that this Eggman doesn't kill. This Eggman's sole purpose is to defeat Sonic, but he doesn't kill. That is because it's a kids show and they don't want Eggman to be a murderer, I guess. Sega specifically changed this one thing about Eggman to make him less of a murderer here because it's a kids show. He even tells his robots to calm down on trying to kill Sonic because that's not what he wants to do. Even in the end, when he goes super at the end of, as you would say, the first season, Eggman is telling the robot to stop because he doesn't want Sonic to die. Eggman in most of this series does not want a lot of people to die, and it's very interesting, but it's also not much of a difference to really starkly say, oh, it's a different character, just like Mayakawa Sonic. Also with Eggman, he is evil and cartoony, but unlike the games, he feels more like a cartoon villain that you would see on a kids show in like the early 90s instead of the more anime cartoony villain. Now, let's go into something that I talked about a little bit earlier, but Eggman's idea of working with people. Unlike Lost World, where it's fucking dumb, in general, whenever Eggman really works with Sonic in the gang, it's mostly on a platonic idea that he is going to take over the world himself, like SA2, or in Sonic X, in the Murderous saga, where he helps them with Murderous solely because he wants to take over the world. Eggman will work with people if it is needed. Eggman will not be over talking everything and trying to get the one up and everything. It's so fucking stupid because a lot of that happens in IDW. In IDW, Eggman is working with Sonic during the Zombot arc, but the whole time he's making jokes about how you failed and not, I'm so better, Sonic, and how you failed and I'm the genius here. And when Eggman would not give a shit if he's trying to save the world, he's trying to take over. Again, if he fails, he doesn't have the world. Eggman's not that fucking much of an idiot to start gloating in the middle of that shit. He even does it in Frontiers where he's all like shunning the idea of helping Sonic, which is like, what the fuck? Did you not fucking watch the games? Like, this dude is okay with it. Even in X, he's okay with it. Like, if it's an important thing, he will be okay. He isn't gonna talk and be all over the fucking place. That doesn't fucking make sense for his character. I'm sorry that you come to these videos just wanting to hear about Eggman's character and I rant on about Ian Flynn because I fucking hate what he does with the characters. I'm so sorry. Now, this is something I just want to touch on a little bit. It's about Eggman's more cartoony side, if you want to say. It's more about those times where people think Eggman is supposed to be taken seriously. He's supposed to be the baddest motherfucker in the land. He's supposed to shoot bitches and kill people and be using robots to do it with big giant mechs of dragons and lizards and crazy shit. No, that's not Eggman. Eggman can do that stuff. Eggman in his creation was a very goofy character. A lot of his childlike nature comes from that because he's going to cry like a fucking baby. He's going to have a little tantrum to be funny. And again, in Sonic Unleashed, where he's laughing and laughing so maniacally, there's times where he coughs. That has actually been done in the classics. Eggman is a little bit of a gag compared to Sonic, who is really not used for comedy at all, besides maybe some small Looney Tunes stuff here and there in Sonic X. Besides that, he's not really the comedy factor. Especially in Sonic X, Eggman is definitely more of the comedic relief there, especially in a lot of moments. But Eggman in general is more the comedic relief because that's what he was made to be. A little bit more comedic, a little bit more cartoony. Again, I think a lot of people forget that the Sonic characters are cartoon characters at the end of the day, which is weird to me because they take stuff seriously, sure, but you can take stuff seriously and still be goofy and cartoony. Look at shows like OKKO, Steven Universe, and different stuff like that. They can take stuff seriously. Also, we can talk about Eggman being extroverted because Eggman wears his emotions on his sleeves. He doesn't show most of them, but it's mostly probably because he's a narcissist. But the ones he does show, like sadness, he's openly able to do it if he has the chance, like his vulnerability with Tails. It's obvious that he does have some extroversion to him, unlike Sonic, who's introverted, which I think is a very good parallel between both of them. Now, when talking about Eggman's character like we did with Sonic's, we talked about Sonic's flat character arc, which is a character who does not get influenced but influences the people around him. He can get influenced sometimes, but it cannot be dramatically. Now, going on the opposite side of that, we will talk about Dr. Eggman, who is the idea of what is called the negative flat character arc. While Sonic believes the truth, Eggman believes the lie. He knows that the lie is his thing and he will push that lie until he meets the end. Now, for this example, we will use Alright, fine, I won't use a DBZ reference. Alright, for example, we're going to use All For One from My Hero Academia. Are you fine, you Dragon Ball fuckers? You better be fucking happy. Okay, so from going from All For One from My Hero Academia, he is clearly a villain who clearly pushes the idea of to gain power, you need to take it from others, hence the name All For One. So, All For One's whole thing is basically taking abilities from others and giving them to the quote-unquote needy who need it more, saying that people without power are basically useless, and the only way to survive in this world is to have power, which is the lie of the world, being hence known by Izuku Midoriya being the truth. Now, with that, All For One uses whatever he can and uses whatever people he can to manipulate and personally become stronger. He uses the people around him to become stronger. Like Eggman, he manipulates gods and different stuff like that to his advantage to make his ideal world. His ideals are pushing the lie that technology will be the furtherment of the future. He will push that lie on anyone because he pushes his own agenda on anyone. So that is what makes them connected. Now, if you want to get into a more connected character, let's go to Frieza. Yes, I'm saying Frieza. I'm doing Dragon Ball. Fuck you. With Frieza, he is also a great example of a flat character arc, but a more menacing flat character arc. He is the character whose whole idea is grabbing Saiyans from everywhere he can and taking them and making them work for him. He literally destroys planets and sells them to the highest bidder. And that is literally kind of parallel to Eggman, which is all about the destruction of nature and everything and what demolition people do. He's basically a demolitionist in kind of ideas. He can become more in other stories. But with Frieza, Akira Toriyama specifically describes him as a real estate speculator, which is, in Toriyama's words, the worst sort of people. You know what's the worst thing for animals? Humans, which is why Eggman is human. And you know what makes that even worse? That he's a demolition man. He destroys the nature that the animals live in. It's a perfect idea of using this flat character arc to push the idea of just the opposite. The flat character arc is just made to be their opposite and made to oppose them in a lot of ways. And I think that is so interesting for a flat character arc to have their opposite flat character arc, which is why I think Eggman should not be able to change. Even if a narcissist can change, Eggman has too many ideas in his head that just holds him back from actually changing. And again, he will never hit rock bottom like that. And to make him hit rock bottom is kind of stupid. And again, Frontiers is stupid, yada yada yada. I don't want to bother you with the details again. And another thing to contradict Ian Flynn, because I'm back on it again, is the idea that Ian Flynn kind of sees Eggman and Sonic as Batman and Joker. He literally put in a scene in the Zombie arc saying, you and I are the same, that we have styles that we won't change, kind of giving a parallel that if Eggman didn't exist, then Sonic wouldn't exist, which makes no sense. At least how I'm interpreting it, because the line and the way the line was presented does not fucking represent that. But again, this is what the fuck Ian is making, because he generally doesn't even understand what the fuck the song is saying, or he's just changing the context to make it seem smart because he references everything every 10 minutes. But again, they are not really the same. They have the same dedication and styles that they won't change, sure, but he makes it seem like if Eggman is gone, then Sonic can't survive, which I think is dumb. And it is kind of pushed in Ian Flynn's and the 2010 Sonic's kind of idea, where they think that Sonic's literal job is to defeat Eggman, when that's not his job. He's just getting rid of a nuisance and going on with his life. The reason why Sonic doesn't kill Eggman is because of the fact that he's having fun with him. And also, Sonic isn't really just like a killer for casual stuff. And again, he has fun with it. Sonic will kill when needed. And if you want to go by what I said in Sonic CD, he did try to blow him up. He could have died from that. And I'm not going to go fully into too much detail, but Eggman and Starline's dynamic in IDW is very weird, and I kind of don't like it. Now, since this video isn't as bad with comparisons of Eggman, I don't have to go on a whole rant about how you misunderstand Eggman, because people to a certain extent understand Eggman. It's not like they don't get the gist of him. Eggman compared to Sonic, in my opinion, does feel a little bit more simpler. Even when making this video, I had to like think of every detail and make sure I had every detail right, even though like a lot of the details I've already stated, and it's like there's not a lot to go off with Eggman, unlike with Sonic, who kind of gets more time because he's the main character, and he's a flat character arc, which also extends his time but also makes it a little bit slimmer. But with Eggman, I still find him an interesting villain. I find him an interesting villain for what he does in the games, but with IDW I still don't find it that interesting. And I really like what they do with Eggman because Eggman is such an interesting, not super complex, but works as a villain for a long-running series. Again, Sonic is a long-running series and is meant to go on for multiple years, not just a couple of years. Just like Sonic, they're supposed to really last forever. They're not really supposed to change. They can change in small ways, but they're not really supposed to. And I didn't put this in my original Sonic video, I took it out because it really didn't make no sense. But when we do talk about Maekawa Sonic sometimes does have kind of a character arc. He does change in kind of big ways. I won't say it's fully big, but he does change, even though Sonic overall is really not supposed to change, being a flat character arc. But they can in small ways, but it's not really agreed upon that he should do that. Even though I have plenty of ideas in my head of Sonic having small little arcs that change him a little bit like Goku, but overall I still think that Sonic should really change because Sonic doesn't have much to really change besides maybe some stuff like going in without thinking, which isn't that big of a problem for Sonic, but it can be something that changed. Just like Eggman, I don't really want him to change. Again, when we see Eggman and Sage, I find that idea just very dumb, and I don't like the idea of Eggman changing for the sake of dumb fan service. It's the only way I can perceive it is fan service because there is nothing rooted in Eggman's character that makes sense for him to find his appreciation for Sage or even try to have a daughter. Again, Eggman does not care for anyone but himself. It has always been shown that he cares for himself and nobody else. So it's very weird that we want this egg to crack in a weird fucking way and start bringing out weird ass green yolk when he usually has a white and yellow center. Again, it's just weird to me how people like Ian Flynn's interpretations of these characters, because these characters aren't really that accurate. They get small stuff right, but doesn't make them the same character at the end of the day. You can say that for Eggman and Maekawa Sonic because they don't change a lot of them. They may add some stuff, but I would still call them a different characterization, but I wouldn't change them from being the same Sonic because they're mostly manipulated in the story the same way. They don't change dramatically, unlike the American versions in IDW. That's the reason why I don't really like IDW, because it doesn't understand these characters and what these characters are meant to be. They have these cool moments or moments that are close, and I don't like those ideas because those ideas do not work for Sonic when we can have a consistent character. Again, people want their consistent characters on one side, but as I've been on Twitter lately, I find out that a lot of people don't give a shit about that. This is probably people lately more than older people, even though you still have ignorant fuckers who still do this. But the whole idea that Eggman is this way is just that he's this way. Again, it is not that deep to just say you like a different version of Eggman. Like I said, it's fine. I find them shitty. I'm gonna say they're shitty because they're just shitty. But I like Eggman being Eggman. I like the core of his character being the evil scientist who's a narcissist and egotistical, comparing to Sonic's more calm, personal, relatable, confident traits. Again, they work as opposites. We'll be seeing a lot of opposites in these videos, but Eggman was the first opposite to Sonic in some ways. He was similar in some ways, but he was also opposites. And that's why Eggman sees Sonic as such a great rival, because of the fact that they both have, as Ian says, these styles that won't change. But again, they do not live with each other. They do not hold each other. Sonic, as said before, if Eggman was to be good or whatever, he would go and find his own thing to do. And same with Eggman. When Eggman blew up Sonic, he said farewell with his respect, but at the end of the day, he still did what he needed to do because he does not give that much of a fuck. And now, with that last point, I could be misinterpreting what Ian is saying with the whole line, but the fact that he uses it at all just sounds so fucking stupid because, first of all, these two characters aren't even fucking opposites anymore. They're just fucking mostly the same thing if you really want to be honest, to some degree. I'm not gonna say they fully are. Again, I don't like IDW, but again, I can admit that it has different things. But the fact is that this Eggman in IDW I just don't fucking like because he speaks like weirdly and he's just not Eggman. He doesn't feel like Eggman to me all the way. It feels like he does certain Eggman things because Ian has a greater understanding of Eggman and Knuckles more than anyone else. But at the end of the day, it just doesn't feel like these characters are being written right. Again, He can get some things right and get certain parts of the character right, but he is not writing them right. Again, there's more to writing than just character accuracy. There's also certain dialogue things they say that is specifically to them. Just like how I stated earlier, Eggman only calls certain people by name. He doesn't call everyone by their name. He doesn't really even call Tails by his name. He calls him Fox Boy or Fox, or call him Fox Cub. He doesn't just call them by name. He may call Amy that little girl. He does not call a lot of people by name besides Sonic, Shadow, and Knuckles. Again, there are small details to these characters that Ian Flynn does not care about or care to learn, because everyone can talk about, oh, Ian Flynn changed this, changed that, changed this, unless he goes to me, Fukuro Hoseki, Pariah695, about, hey, I don't know these characters like that. Do you mind helping me change them to make them more in character? I'd say sure. I would help him, no problem. And I'm pretty sure Pariah could be a writer, he would definitely help. If Fukuro Hoseki could help in any way she could, she would. Again, I just don't like his writing in general, but if he asked for someone else's help, I'm pretty sure we would all be down to help him, no matter what. Again, especially people who have more of an understanding of Japanese writing, Japanese Sonic, and stuff like that. It's not that hard. I make these videos because I want to talk about the characters as they are, not as Ian Flynn wants to make them, because Ian Flynn has not went to someone else for suggestions, as you can see in his views of how he saw Sonic. Especially, people was like, oh, he gets the points right about Sonic in his description, but at the same time, this description also gets tons of things wrong and doesn't mention other things. Again, there is more to Sonic than just what is meets the eye. There's more to Sonic, just like there's more to Eggman, and I went to all I could go in here in this video, and I don't want to be a negative Nancy all the time. But when people praise these characters that I don't give two fucks about, I'm going to talk about it because, man, you're praising this thing, which I really don't like, but you're allowed to like it. I just don't give a fuck about it. Again, I like Sonic and Eggman being Eggman. I don't like whatever Ian's going to make the characters one day in a comic panel. He gets some stuff right, but he doesn't get everything right. I don't get everything right all the time. I had a whole tweet on Twitter where I said Sonic would say a certain line in Frontiers, but he said it in Generations. Even though I still feel it's off, I still admitted that it was wrong. But again, I've done my studies and my research to say if this is a thing. And again, a lot of people don't debate on Eggman because Eggman is fairly the same. For the most part, I don't want Eggman to be something that he's not, just like how Sonic doesn't want anyone to be something that they're not. I just want the Doctor to be the Doctor, Dr. Eggman.